Welcome to another episode of BioTalk, and a new year has started, and so we thought we would look kind of back at 2013, looking at the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network, and they have a list, their annual list of 2013 winners and losers. One thing we haven't actually talked about on here at all, and that's IVF, and we've both written quite a bit about it, but we haven't done a whole lot of talking about IVF, and one of the stories that they had in their winners section, I've actually mentioned this woman on my blog before, Narelle Gretsch, Grech. I don't know how she's Australian. I've written about her before. She's a donor-conceived woman, and she had been searching for her biological father for 15 years. And obviously it's a search that a lot of donor-conceived children are going through or go through. We're finding out now. There was a whole, the CBC did a whole documentary on the, Anonymous Father's Day and what these donor-conceived children think about their situation. And so she's one of those that wanted to find her biological father, and then it became even more urgent for her in 2011 when she was diagnosed with advanced bowel cancer. And it was a disease, it's a genetic disease, and she didn't get it from her mother's side. So obviously she got that disease from her sperm donor father that she didn't know anything about. All she knew, she said, she wrote, there was an article written about her several years ago. She said all she knew growing up was about her father was that his code name was T5. Yeah. And that's all she knew. He was brown-haired and brown-eyed with O-positive blood type, and that's all she knew. And and obviously wanted something more, especially finding out she has this terminal disease. I mean, doctors gave her only a few more years to live after she was diagnosed in 2011. And so anyway, she was on a search for 15 years, and I had written about her before and didn't know until looking at the list. She's on the winners list because she actually did, it's bittersweet, because she did finally find her father, her biological father, Ray Tana. And they had a meeting in February of this past year. And she died a month later after finding him finally. But there was a reunion, and it was just really great. I mean, because, he was on I saw a video clip. They had a video clip of him he was on an Australian talk show to discuss his experience with anonymous sperm donation, and just talked about, meeting her for the first time 30 years later, something he forgot about, something he did, something he did in the early 80s, probably needing a little bit extra cash or something or whatever. And this woman comes into his life, and he's just like, the fact that he hadn't been a part of her life for 30 years, he said, just didn't matter. It was like automatic. The connection was there. He talked about, his beautiful daughter that he had, and that's how he saw her, He saw her as his daughter. I mean, and
why wouldn't he, though? I mean,
right, exactly.
But probably with like any adoption situation, I'm sure that there's a lot of that going on, where there's a recognition between parent and child simply because of the biological connection.
And it is, and that's what drives me kind of a little crazy. What these donor conceived children are going through is just when you actually and this is something they had no say in.
No.
And this and especially finding, just being deliberately deprived of a connection with their biological heritage, and that's what drives me crazy about it. And that's, that was the point of when I wrote about this just recently, and just hearing, what this man said about finding his daughter. And there was a great picture of the two of them, just hugging together. And it's a beautiful picture. And it angers me because, IVF advocates, I mean, they desperately want us to believe that biology is just irrelevant when it comes to family. Families who raises you, it doesn't matter, who blood doesn't matter. And
well, yeah, I mean, and we all know that's not true because, adopted children feel that pull to find out where they came from, who their natural mother is, who their natural father is. I mean, my mother-in-law was adopted. I have 2 cousins who were adopted. There is this need for them to find out where they came from. Now, they were, conceived probably not in the best of circumstances. And, my aunt and my mother-in-law's mother, adopted mother, made the best of a bad situation, right? They took these children in and they raised them, but there's still that pull, right, for them. And, I was lucky to be around when my mother-in-law met her natural family, and I got to see her kind of blossom in that group of siblings that she never knew. And it was really a special moment. And so experience tells us that there is that pull. And just to sit there and look at someone who has been donor conceived, this is what drives me crazy. It isn't just that we do this to them, but then when they complain or they express any kind of hurt or any kind of valid feeling of being marginalized, they're basically told just to be shut up and be grateful for their life. That's what drives me crazy, right? Because this is not an adoption situation. This is not making the best of a bad situation. This was done to them on purpose.
Right.
And the anonymity is there to protect the fertility industry, to keep their donors coming back, right? Because who's going to donate if they know that they're going to have kids looking for them, in 15, 20 years? No one's going to do that, right? If they know their identity is going to be, placed out there.
Right.
And so this is all just done to protect an industry, a money-making industry, right? And then they're told that whatever they're feeling is invalid, that that natural desire that they have, that all of us have to know where we came from. I mean, that show, Who Do You Think You Are, on, was it A&E or something? I mean, the whole show is all about finding your ancestors. And the show is, who do you think you are, right? So our identity is very much wrapped up in where we came from, even generations back, right? That's a very important part of our identity. Biologically, yes, it's a huge deal. And to sit there and to look them in the eye and to tell them that whatever they're feeling isn't valid, or that we haven't failed them in some way, is ridiculous.
Right.
We have failed them.
And
absolutely failed them. On purpose, we failed them. And not just incidentally, but we on purpose deny them half of who they are, and then we expect them to be happy about that.
Right. And we talked about this earlier, but one of these donor conceived children, he had a really great response to that. And, his name is Barry Stevens, the quote I have from him. And he's, I believe this was from the CBC's documentary, Anonymous Father's Day. Yeah. And he talked about, that being told that people shouldn't question their conception because they wouldn't be alive otherwise. And he said, if that were true, then anyone who is a product of rape would have to endorse rape. He said, it's quite possible to be grateful for your life and question the aspects of your conception.
Absolutely.
There are a number of ways children can be conceived and brought into the world. Rape, he mentioned, is one. Or just out of wedlock.
Out of wedlock.
Pregnant,
Well, yeah, and I've
discussed
like this too. I had my first child out of wedlock. Mm-hmm. That was really tough on her and tough on us as a married couple.
Right.
My husband and I are still together. But I did her a disservice. Mm-hmm. Right?
Right.
And it could have gone horribly wrong. Luckily, it didn't. We're probably the anomaly, right? And I've been, honest about that. But yeah, that I look back on that. I'm glad that she's here.
Right.
And I'm very happy that she exists. But that was not bringing her into the best situation possible, right? Mm-hmm. And as parents, that's what we're supposed to do. Mm-hmm. We're supposed to, within our abilities, bring children into the world under the best possible circumstances.
Exactly.
And that's why we say, out of wedlock births are difficult or bad, because the kids are always marginalized. I mean, and that's the same thing I think with IVF. Everybody has family members that have used it. I do as well. And I don't look at those kids and think, oh, they shouldn't be here. It's a question of more, were they treated with the utmost respect?
Right. And that's what we should be concerned about as Catholics, as pro-lifers. It's all about treating human beings with dignity and respect that they are deserved.
Absolutely, are they deserving of? And I look at one of them. I said, this little boy spent 2 years in the deep freeze.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I mean, was that treating him with the utmost respect? Filling him with antifreeze and throwing him in the deep freeze for when you're ready to have him, continue on in his life? I mean, is that really? I mean, he's a blessing regardless. It's more of a question of how was he treated, and was that really the best way for him to begin his life?
Exactly.
And you can't say yes to that. Like, you can't say that throwing him in the freezer for a couple of years was the best thing for him, because it wasn't. And I mean, he's lucky he survived that. Most embryos are damaged by that process, and a good portion of them don't survive it. So, really, and then that's what I look at. It's as choices as parents. Are we making selfish choices? I made a selfish choice. I had a child out of wedlock. It was a very selfish choice. It was a very difficult situation. And, I had to put my selfishness in check and say, okay, well, that wasn't the right thing to do, and now I'm going to try to fix it.
It's funny, because you want to be fair to the feelings of the people who are going through IVF and the reasons they're going through them. But at the same time, you have to be honest about what really is going on. Like, I was on the radio a few weeks ago, and we called it, the way we were talking about it, we called it, our culture's love-hate relationship with babies, and how we're destroying children on one hand and then going out of our way to create children.
To create others,
But I, in thinking about that, so that was like the love relationship was IVF or whatever. But at the same time, it's like, is that really love? Is that like, that's not the kind of, love is doing what's best for the loved one.
Right.
And, IVF is just not the best thing for children. And
that's the sad part. That's the hard part. That's the tough pill to swallow.
Right.
Is that there is so much of a dark side to it. We like IVF. A lot of pro-lifers, especially, I mean, a lot of Catholics really dig IVF because you get a bouncing baby out of it. And you think,
well, that's and it's creating life, right? And how can that be wrong?
Creating life, how can this be bad? But at the same time, what we're not really focused on, because it happens behind the scenes, is the devastation. Right? The 1 in 30 embryos that makes it. 1 in 30 is the UK total, probably similar to other. And, I just got a really heartbreaking letter from a child who was conceived with IVF. Her parents, you can hint from the email, that are Catholic. And she knows that there were 2 other embryos that didn't make it. And she's heartbroken.
Right.
Heartbroken over that, because she feels like she's probably got horrible survivor's guilt, right? Just like a survivor of survivor of abortion or something. And there's nobody there to help her.
Right.
I mean, her parents won't even acknowledge the fact that she had siblings. And so you're getting to this point where the kids are realizing, I think part of her pain is that she's realized that she was marginalized as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
She just got lucky and made it out, right? But the fact that her parents won't even acknowledge the humanity of the siblings that didn't make it, mm-hmm. It's got to be super painful for her, because I think that that's a reflection then upon her, maybe that, and I think that's what the problem is that, you know, when you start, it sounds really crass, but that's really what's happening here is you're purchasing children, especially in the case of donor nannies, right?
Yeah.
And then the kids feel like something's wrong here. Somehow I was marginalized by this. And when they try to express themselves, they're not being taken seriously. It's really sad.
And that is what's sad. And that's why, you know, I think for most pro-life advocates, the main problem with IVF is that so many embryos are destroyed in the process. And, you know, and I've actually heard from some pro-life people either that they're just in favor of it in general, or that IVF would be ethical if we could ensure that it could be done without destroying or discarding any other human embryos. And it's like our natural inclination is to be concerned about how life is being taken out of the world. Right. But we should be equally as concerned with how it's being brought into the world.
And that's the thing. Once you take procreation out of the body, really anything. Everyone thinks that it's just not a big deal being conceived in a dish,
right?
You know,
rather than a womb, it doesn't matter, right?
But the reality is, we don't know that for certain, right? I mean, we're dealing with IVF that's 30 years old, which means that at most we're dealing with 30-year-old adults, right?
Well, Narelle, the woman I talked about at the beginning, she was 30 years old when she died.
Yeah,
with that bowel cancer.
Yeah, so we're dealing with 30, 40-year-old, right?
Science.
And we're getting millions more every year, right? Or, you know, over the last 30 years, it's been 5 million. So, and it's exponentially growing. The reality is, we don't know the long-term effects. We really don't. And if you corner experts, they will admit that there's absolutely we just don't know. This is one huge experiment. And the fact that we're willing to experiment on the next generation like this on such a massive scale is scary,
right?
Because really, that's commodifying them just immediately.
But see, and that is the point. It's we are experimenting on the children, but we're doing it because of selfish because we want the children, we want the babies, we want the kids,
right?
You know,
yeah, and this is what has led us to the 3-parent embryo, right? Which we've discussed before. I want to have a child, right? Without a mitochondrial disorder, but I'm a woman who has a mitochondrial disorder, and so I can't help but pass that on. But I want this, right? So I'm willing to actually genetically modify my offspring,
right,
without any real animal studies,
right?
Like really nothing of substance, to indicate that this is safe. And yet I'm willing to go forward because we've been doing this for so long. It's like, let's just try it and see if it works.
Right.
Instead of actually thinking, what does this do to the next generation? How does this affect them? You know, we don't really know, and yet we're willing to go forward. And that is where that's the legacy of IVF. It's just this idea that we're just going to try it and see if it works. And if the kid turns out, the kid turns out. But what if the kid doesn't turn out? You know, I mean, there are definitely. I saw a story on PBS. It was called "Ghost in Your Genes," and it was all about what we call epigenetics, which is this idea that it's not just when in genes you inherit, which genes are turned on and off. That's what really matters a lot of the time. And IVF really messes with that epigenetics, and it causes, because you're not being conceived in a natural environment, that can really mess with the genes being turned on and turned off. And we know that kids with IVF have different gene expression. Who are conceived with IVF have different gene expression than those conceived naturally. And her child, this woman, was talking about this, and she was saying her child has Beckwith-Weedmans. I actually have a niece with Beckwith-Weedmans, and so I was familiar with this genetic disorder. It's an epigenetic disorder. And she was saying, if I had known that there was a greater risk when I did IVF, because he was IVF conceived, right? If I had known, would I have done this? I don't know. You know, she wasn't really told. We didn't really know at the time. And so here you have a kid who didn't just turn out right. He needs lifelong help. And he's got developmental delays and physical delays, and he's got a greater risk of cancer, and he's got all this other stuff. And we're going ahead with this without really, really caring if something goes wrong, we'll just abort or, do this or and that's just, and that's just horrifying.
And that's just going back to the whole, I mean, all of those things you mentioned, the fact that it is an experiment, we are finding out that there are, actual physical complications with this kind of conception and this kind of creation of human life. But, this is what we want. This is our immediate need. This is what we want now. I mean, that's just, it is turning the child into consciously or unconsciously, you want to be fair to the parents, but to desire a child as the end result of a technological procedure instead of the fruit of, marital love is not to treat the child as a person to love, but as a product to obtain ultimately.
And that's the sad part is, I mean, these kids are so wanted, and it's and we cannot, discount the desire. That is a desire, and it's a great desire. It's a natural desire. It's something that should be,
good.
A desire is a good desire. But at what point are we? I think where IVF goes wrong is that it doesn't really put the needs of the child first.
Right. It's just like it's the complication with any kind of love or learning to love anything or anyone rightly. You have to put their needs ahead of your own. And whether that's marriage, whether that's friendship, whether that's, anything, but especially your child, you have to think about what's best for the child ultimately, not what your own desire is. And that's the hard part to communicate, to
I tell this, like, I give talks a lot about IVF and how it really has catapulted us toward cloning, because really once we started making life in a dish, really anything goes, because you can't just draw the line anywhere. It's a random line. It just, you take that outside the body and basically whatever is acceptable. And one time, a older woman came up to me very angry with me, very, very angry.
Yeah.
And she said to me, "How dare you tell me that my son can't have children?" And I said, "I'm not telling you anything of the sort.
Right.
Your church is telling you that this kind of stuff is wrong. I'm just informing you of what your own faith is telling you."
Yeah.
And she just was still mad. She says, they can't have kids unless they use IVF. They can't do it, blah, blah, blah. And I looked at her, and I think it was the Holy Spirit. He just came through me, and I said, "So how do you feel about having grandchildren on ice?" In other words, it's not about the one you're going to hold.
Right.
It's about all the other ones that aren't going to make it. And the one that you do hold, was that really the best? Are they going to be put on ice for a while? I mean, when is it okay to freeze your offspring?
Are they going to know where half of their genetic material comes from? Or they,
And so she immediately stepped back, and I think understood what I was saying, that her son wanted a child and she wanted a grandchild, and that's what was paramount to them.
Right.
But what is lost then is the best interests of the child, and whether or not, if they were going to use donor gametes, how are they going to feel about that? How is that going to affect the marriage? Right?
Yeah.
How is that, is that going to affect the marriage if one partner isn't a biological parent, and the other one is? And what happens to the child when they want to know?
Exactly.
More?
Exactly.
Or they're devastated when they find out that they had siblings that are still in decrease, right? Or didn't make it, or were thrown in the trash.
or
because
we're torn apart for science experiments
science
or
research.
whatever.
I mean, how, these are things that we shouldn't be so nonchalantly putting the next generation through. We need to, as a society, get back to this idea that children are not to be experimented on. They're not rights. They're not. We're not entitled to them. They're gifts, and they need to be treated as such. And like I said, filling them with antifreeze and throwing them in is not treating them as a gift.
Exactly.
You're treating them as something that can be used later when it's more convenient for you.
Yeah.
And that isn't how we should be seeing our offspring. And so, and I think that is where we focus. It's not a hatred or incalcitrance toward people who are,
it's
fertile. It's just it's an acknowledgement that every single one of us deserves to be treated with the utmost dignity and respect from the very moment we are conceived, and that means that we all deserve that. We all deserve that, whether we get it or not. Nobody's perfect and nothing's perfect, but we all deserve.
And there is a purpose for creation. That there is a purpose for the way God intended children to be created.
Exactly.
For those of us who believe, and just naturally, taking creation out of its natural, God-given context and moving it into the science lab is just morally problematic, or it should be. And it turns children from a gift of God into a gift of science, and it alters the way we view the wonder and the mystery of new life and how that life should be treated, and that's ultimately what we're seeing now. So, okay, great.